Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Question Time with myself, Harry Knight. Once again, I'm going to be doing my best to provide some answers to some of the questions that you've posed for me in the comment streams of previous videos. Before I dive into this episode too much, I just wanted to say how cool I think it is that sort of seeing the community that's been developing in the comment streams. And as people are posing questions, others of you are providing answers, and it just seems to have been this sort of fairly positive environment for people to pose questions in and give answers. So thank you to everybody that's been involved with that. It's been really heartwarming for me, to be honest, to just see that developing around these videos that we're putting together. So yeah, good on you all. Anyway, first question this episode comes from Mitt. Mitt was asking for some information on how to surf steeper waves, with particular emphasis to saying that when he or she tries to ride a shorter board with a bit more rocker in it, that they're struggling to get enough speed and get in early, and when they're riding a big longer board, they're tending to just catch the nose of the rail and nosedive. So I suspect you are not alone. Surfing steeper waves is always an interesting challenge. So what I want to do, let's just make sure that we're all talking along the same lines, or singing from the same hymn book, shall we say. So within Surf Simply, one of the things that we have tried to do is to create a little bit of a language that allows the coaches in the water to very quickly explain what they're seeing in waves coming towards them. So we have a scale of, as a wave rolls in towards the beach, and it starts off pretty soft and uncatchable, and then it grows and becomes a bit steeper, and then it grows and becomes a bit steeper still, and then it becomes very steep, and then it starts to pitch over and break, and then it is broken white water. Okay, and we refer to these as A, B, C, D, E, and F. Okay, and all waves go through this cycle. They all start off, way out the back, way too soft to catch, and as they roll into the beach, they get steeper and steeper and steeper, they pitch over and they break. Now, when we talk about steep waves, what we're really talking about is fast waves. Okay, waves that go through this much quicker, and the thing that's actually steep is the ocean floor underneath them. The steeper the ocean floor, the more kinetic energy the wave has when it arrives. It stands up and goes through that breaking process much quicker. Okay, we have, within this scale, we have what I like to refer to as a Goldilocks zone, where a B is kind of a catchable wave. It's catchable, but it's soft. We're going to have to paddle fast straight to the beach in order to catch it. D is catchable, but it's going to be pretty steep. It's going to be a pretty heart and mouth drop. C is our perfect. That's the really nice, easy wave to catch. E is too steep. Maybe pro levels, air dropping into waves. That's doable, but for the rest of us mere mortals, probably a little bit too steep. And unless we're on a jet ski or a foil board, A is probably too soft. So so that's sort of what we're looking at. Now, when we talk about catching steep waves, or like I say, fast waves, there are three things we can do. The first one Mick kind of mentioned is we can start thinking about the board that we're riding, because what we want to do is we want to catch these waves as early as we possibly can. We want to paddle as fast as we can. We want to get into them as early as possible. Okay, if we can be catching the wave early, we're going to have more time to think about getting to our feet, setting our rail, going down the line before the whole thing breaks, and we're left with a very steep drop. Okay, what you'll notice is boards that are designed for really steep waves. Sometimes we refer to waves that hit slabs, where they really do just pitch over on themselves. Boards that are designed around slab right, I think we mentioned this in a previous episode, now I'm saying it, but tend to actually have flat rockers. Although they're shorter boards, they tend to actually keep the rockers flat to keep the paddle speed up. The alternative is just riding bigger, longer boards. When I used to work in France, we used to take the big kind of 8-foot foam longboards out, and we would paddle as hard as we could into the shore break, and we would try to catch it really early on, so we could be on our feet before the whole thing started pitching over. And that was one way of dealing with it. Now, the other thing that we need to think about is changing our idea of what a catchable wave looks like. All right. Now, what I mean by that is when we start surfing, we tend to do it on fairly gently sloped beaches where the wave takes a long time to go A to B to C to D to E to F. And what that means is that we get an idea of what a good catchable wave looks like when it's 100 yards away, 50 yards away, 20 yards away. And what we're probably doing is sitting, if we were to pitch this over and be a bird's eye view with the beach down here, we would be sitting probably somewhere in between a B and a C, and we'd see a wave coming in that was transitioning between B and C, and we'd go, yeah, okay, this looks like a good wave. I'm going to turn around. By the time I've done my 5 paddle strokes, I'm going to be at C, the wave's going to stand up, and it's going to be fantastic. Now, as we become more experienced, we start surfing another break that's a little faster, or maybe it's even just the tide changes to where the waves stand up and break a little quicker. A lot of times people don't adjust what a good wave looks like at those distances. And so we still end up starting to paddle for a wave that's transitioning between B and C. But on a steep beach, a fast breaking wave, what's going to happen is the 5 paddle strokes are going to carry us all the way through to this DE zone because the wave's going through it so much quicker. This Goldilocks zone is much more compressed. So what we need to do instead is we actually need to sit further out to C, and we need to sit sort of maybe on the transition between A's and B's, and we're looking at waves that normally we would say, well, that's not even catchable. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to turn around, we're going to paddle as hard as we can, nice and straight to the beach, get the speed up as high as possible, and try to catch the waves as early as we possibly can. Okay? Not that I want you to rush and stop paddling and start climbing to the feet. I want us to still make a good catch, but I do want us to try and catch it early. So go out and spend a session just missing most of the waves because you're going for ones that you don't think are catchable, and you'll probably surprise yourself with how early you can get into the waves. Now, the final thing we can think about doing is angling our takeoff, which someone actually suggested in the comments. Angling the takeoff is great because it means rather than trying to fit a 9-foot board into a 3-foot wave, or even a 6-foot board into a 3-foot wave, where it's steep and curling over and nosediving is potentially a problem, if we can get the board turned and set across the wave, nosediving is very, very unlikely. Now, the downside is that as we angle the board, as we're paddling, our relative speed to the wave, even though our paddle speed remains the same, our speed relative to the wave is slowing down. By the time you get to 45 degrees, our relative speed to the wave is halved. And what that means is it's harder to catch the wave really nice and early so that we can be standing up when the wave's not too steep. So we have to learn to balance that process, okay, so that we can paddle in what we normally say. Those of you guys that have sat in on our seminar on angled takeoffs will know we say that as the wave behind you becomes a C shape, whether it's 20 yards behind you or it's as it's starting to lift the tail or it's the last strokes you do, as the wave becomes a C, that's the time to start angling. Because before that, when the wave's softer, we still need that straight line speed towards the beach. But as the wave starts to go through B, C, D, E in a shorter time, we may need to actually start angling earlier than the C. We may even want to just set off paddling at 20, 30 degrees to the beach. But like I said, that's potentially a risky strategy because it may mean that actually we paddle ourselves away from the peak of the wave, or it may mean that we don't have enough speed to catch the wave while it's soft. So it takes a little bit of figuring out. And again, same as with trying to catch the waves when they're soft, don't practice this over, pitching, barreling 8-foot waves over shallow coral. Go out on a nice small day over soft sand, maybe chest to shoulder high. That's a great time to try and figure out some of the mechanics and some of the timing of all this stuff, because the consequences are pretty low. You can paddle in and out really easily. You can probably get a nice high wave count. All right, hopefully that answered that question. On to the next one. Okay, so the next question comes from David Gough, who was commenting on last week's episode where we were talking about rail shapes and hard versus soft rails, and he was asking about rail thickness. Now, rail thickness is kind of an interesting one. If we have the rail of a surfboard, we have the sort of outline, the cross section of a board like this. We measure the thickness of the rail at different distances from the apex. So, maybe an inch, maybe 2 inches and 3 inches from the apex. We're measuring that rail thickness, and it does have some effects. But it is one where I sometimes see bad terminology being used or ideas that I would disagree with out there. So when we start playing around with rail thickness, let's say we take the same board with the same thickness where the stringer is here, but with thicker or thinner rails. Okay, so I'll have to try to draw this now. No, we definitely need more dome in the deck than that. There we go. Let's go down to a real skinny rail, and hopefully about the same thickness, but our rail is significantly thinner here. Now, this does two things. Going back to what we were talking about last night, we've got a much tighter transition around the rail here, so the water is much more likely to just sheet off this one and much more likely to grip onto this more rounded rail. So thicker rails, once they're set in the wave, will tend to have a little bit more grip than a skinny rail. Skinny rails moving more towards the ledge cutting technique that we were talking about last week. Now, one of the things that I see written about a lot is the idea that the buoyancy of a thick rail makes it really hard to set it in the wave and actually get going across the wave. And that's the one that I have a problem with. Okay, so theoretically, if we take these two surfboards and you were to lie on them, just still in the water, this one may feel a bit more stable because we've got these thicker volume of foam out, probably outside of our body. Most surfboards are wider than most humans. We're going to have some rail-to-rail stability from the flotation of these rails. Okay, but it increased, not huge, but it's going to be increased. Now, the thing that I disagree with is the idea that the thicker rail is going to really make a difference when you're trying to set that edge into it because of its buoyancy. If we took, even 3 inches of width of the surfboard and we took the whole length of that rail, the amount of volume within there is a couple of liters. And the buoyant force from that, I just don't think is going to be a huge issue for us. But what we do have is much more surface area in contact with the water, and that surface area is going to be generating lift. Okay, so I think it's much more likely that it's the lift being generated by a thick rail. As you set off and we're moving across the water at 15-20 kilometers an hour and we're trying to set that rail into the wave face, this skinny rail just isn't generating as nearly as much lift as we try to put it over, and it's much more likely to sink into the wave face than this big thick rail, lots of surface area. That is going to provide quite a lot of lift force until it's properly engaged and the water is actually following that rail around. That's, again, kind of a hypothesis. I don't think that this has really been studied, but my guess is that the 1 or 2 liters of volume increase in the rail between these two is probably not what you're feeling when you feel that slight. We sometimes talk about it being corky. You're trying to set the rail in and it's sort of trying to bob its way out a little bit. But yeah, I don't have too much more to say about the thickness of the rail. The rail thickness and the rail shape, obviously they're quite intertwined, but that's we can have a thick rounded rail, or we can have a thick square rail, and vice versa. Cool. All right, next question. So, last question this episode, it comes from OGP, who I think we have had a question from before, but he or she was asking about some of the mechanics involved in wind transferring energy into a wave and that wave growing. And then they also said, as a footnote to that, how is it that the wind causes whitecaps? Because surely a wave breaks when the water depth below the wave is a certain ratio, and that causes the wave to pitch over, which you're right is one of the reasons. So we will get to part 2 of your question in a second, but how the wind transfers energy into a wave is actually, it's all about aerodynamics. Okay, so we have a wave here. Okay, open ocean wave rolling along in this direction, being blown by the wind. blowing in this direction. Now, what happens is as the wind overtakes the wave, we get what's called compression, okay, of the flow. So all the wind that's arriving at the back of the wave here gets forced up and over the top of the wave, and we get this compressed flow running over the top here. Okay, and any time that you compress a flow, what you do, you tend to increase its velocity. Okay, so our 10-mile-an-hour wind here, say, may increase to 15 or 20 miles an hour as it goes over the shoulder of the wave. And we've all felt this, you know, if you're out surfing on an offshore wind, you feel exactly the same thing as we're paddling into the wave, the wind running up the wave face. Suddenly, those last couple of strokes, the wind's really howling over the top of the wave, and that's due to the same thing, this compression effect as the airflow comes over the top of the wave. Now, what that means, it does two things. Number one is that the wind obviously drags some of the wave with it in this direction, okay? But it also creates an area of high pressure on this side of the wave, okay? And we get the opposite on the other side. As the airflow runs over the top of the wave, it decompresses on the other side and creates an area of relatively low pressure on this side, which sucks the water towards it. So the push from the high pressure and the suck from the low pressure and the friction of just the air molecules against the water molecules all combine to add energy into the wave, and the wave starts to grow and grow and grow and grow. The bigger the wave gets, the more it interferes with the wind flow, and so you actually start to get you get exponential growth in the wave, and the bigger the wave gets, the more airflow it disrupts. So the bigger the high pressure becomes, the bigger the low pressure becomes, the more it grows. Now, theoretically, at this point, what would happen is that the wave would grow exponentially into hundreds of feet high. So what's the limiting factor? Well, the limiting factor is the whitecapping that we tend to see. Now, the whitecapping happens, you're right in that the traditional way that a wave breaks is when the depth of water underneath the wave becomes a certain ratio to the height of the wave, and it's about 1.3 times the height of the wave will pitch over. But there's another way that you can break a wave as well, and that is when we need another wave here so that I can draw all over it. So if we have a nice clean set of waves here, we've got a couple of measurements that we need to talk about. So we've got our wave length, which is the top of the wave to the top of the next wave. That's our wave length. We've got the height of the wave, which is the top of the wave to the bottom of the wave, okay? And when the height of the wave to the wavelength reaches a ratio of 1 to 7, the wave will just spontaneously break. It will just pitch over. It'll be so unstable. If the height is 1/7 of the wavelength, the wave will just fall over. Now, that is very, very rare to see, because, just to put this in perspective, a wave with a 5-second period has a wavelength of about 40 meters, okay? Which would mean that we would need a height of about 6 meters, that's like 20 feet, in order for that spontaneous breaking to happen. Okay, so that's not gonna take place. Average wave height for a 5-second period swell is probably like a meter and a half. But this process here, there's another measurement that we need to know about, and that is what's called the amplitude. Now, the amplitude is different to the height because, believe it or not, sea level is about like this, okay? About halfway on the wave, and the trough of the wave is always below sea level, and the crest of the wave is always above sea level. And the amplitude is the measurement of half of that. So from sea level to the bottom of the trough, or sea level to the crest. And normally on a nice clean established sine wave ground swell like this, they're basically the same. The amplitude is the same whichever way you measure it. Now, the problem is this process here adds to the amplitude above sea level. Okay, it doesn't add the circular rolling motion of the wave doesn't increase in a clean way because of this method. What happens is it kind of sucks the crest of the wave upwards, and the top half of the wave becomes unstable. So that's why when you see a whitecap, it's not the whole wave breaking, it's just the crest of the wave pitching over and breaking. Now, the exact mechanics of this aren't 100% clear. I will put links to the most recent study I could find, and their suggestion was that it's our old friend the Reynolds number that is to blame. And so what happens is, as this high and low pressure, as they suck the crest of the wave up, the wave becomes a really kind of weird distorted shape, but basically the wave crest suddenly stands up quite steep. And what we get is flow separation. As the wind runs up the back of the wave here, we get flow separation and the wind running out over the top. And if the wind speed is above about 5 to 10 meters per second, which is around 20, 30 kilometers an hour, something like that, then it's strong enough. The wind speed will actually be more powerful than the surface tension of the water, and the wind speed, the wind blowing over the top and separating here, will actually carry water with it, creating a whitecap. Okay, and that's what we're seeing when that starts to happen on a well-established, on a wave that's growing smoothly, where that circular rolling motion is growing, and we're just getting a nice clean sine wave like this. Then we're actually going to have laminar airflow over the top of the wave and carrying on and sticking to the surface of the water like this. But once that crest becomes too steep, we get flow separation, we get whitecaps. And that's the limiting factor. Like I said, this growth becomes exponential until the wave whitecaps. But what then happens is although the wave has whitecapped, some energy has been added to that snowball, which provides a bigger base down here, which means that the next time the wave starts to grow, it can build just a little bit more, and just a little bit more, and just a little bit more. So what you tend to see is whitecaps are more likely to form on lower wavelength waves, where the base of them isn't as big, and so it's easier for the crest to become tall and unstable. It's very hard for the crest to become really unstable on a really long, 15-20 second period wave, because the base is just so big and so stable. Cool. I hope that answered the question. It's a wonderfully complex topic that we don't really seem to fully understand. Like I say, if anyone wants to have a little look through the paper down below, then feel free to. And hopefully I will see you all next week. For now, take care and stay safe.